All right, we're taping this after practice number 2 on a Saturday for UNLV football, and man, football's here. I am jazzed up. I mean, Caleb played the game. He played for UNLV, so I'm sure he's jazzed beyond where I am. Jokingly, I'll throw out there just a couple things from today's practice that I enjoyed. The vomiting is here, and it's not a bad sign, man. It's hot. I mean, they're going at it. It was 91 degrees up to about 94 by the end of practice. That was even, from 8:30 to 10:30 in the morning. Tempers were starting to flare, which means that they're playing hard. And I know you noticed a couple of fights out there. And I will say, from my standpoint, I did bring water. I'm not going to brag about not bringing water. That's stupid not to be hydrated in this kind of weather. Other media members better start doing it. And also stop drinking coffee before you get out there with a bunch of water. I was offered a cold towel by one Brad Odom. And I was like, no cold towel. Cofield, I didn't even put sunscreen on today. I had a hat on, so I risked. You know what? I forgot it. I forgot to freaking sorry if I can say it. Sunscreen at home.
Yeah.
I'm joking about some of my observations. We have a lot to get into, but for you, what first couple of days? Like, what are some of the cool things you've seen?
Hydration is one of them. I think the water stations being everywhere is one of the things. I think one of the is Brad Odom again. One of the I thought it was just one of my coaches that said it, but I guess it's a coach thing to say quality control. That's when a coach is asking a trainer for water. I guess it's a thing.
Well, I think they're rating the water. I think Brad Odom rated the water. He went over to the person who was in charge of that, and he's like, "You pass." Yeah, which at this point, the water could taste like absolute ass, and you'd be like, "All right, it's good, it's good, I love it."
Like finding an oasis in the desert. You're gonna drink the water. It's gonna be fine. Hydration. It's everywhere. There was pickles after practice 1. As you're leaving the field, there's like a bin of pickles, which I understand the value of pickle juice. When I was in high school, I had my own special water bag. I was a cramper. I was an avid cramper. So I would have a water bottle on the sideline filled with pickle juice just for me. So a couple of guys mistakenly drank my water bottle and realized it was pickle juice. So, but no, those are the signs of camp that football is back. When you start seeing those little things going on, it's in the air, right? And there's going to be guys giving up, vomiting, and getting back in the next play. That's the thing that's really crazy about it. We see the vomit happen, and it's like, well, you think he's going to be down for a little bit. Nope, he's back in next play. He just had to go to the sideline, let it out, and get right back out there. But that's a part of the work, man. It's one of those things, no matter how hard you thought you prepared by yourself or during the offseason, if you come into camp and give it 110%, you're going to hit a limit. You're going to hit a wall at some point. And camp is about finding that wall and breaking through it to get to the next level before the season starts.
So let's talk defense mostly on this podcast. We have so much material, folks. It's so cool through the first couple of days. But let's talk defense because we were offered up Michael Scher, the DC. Obviously, they've got a defensive head coach in Barry Odom, so he's got some things he wants to talk about as well. And Jackson Woodard was available. Jackson Woodard's a really interesting case because they're switching with 3-3-5. He was at Arkansas. He didn't get a ton of playing time, but guess what? That means he practiced in the 3-3-5. So he's got this interesting deal where he hasn't played a lot, but he can be a leader. But I know you wanted to get into communication first because it's so big in a new defense with a 3-3-5. So listen to Jackson Woodard here talk about communication.
There's a little bit of a challenge because of how much of a focal point the DBs are with this defense, where you as a linebacker, in terms of communication and getting the calls right, getting lined up right, is there a little bit of a challenge getting those things sorted out?
Like you said, communication, it comes down to us. We got to talk. But it's no different than any other defenses when it comes to talking. If you don't talk, you're not going to get lined up. If you do talk, you're going to get lined up and make plays. So at the end of the day, it comes down to us, and especially us as linebackers or me, I need to talk. If I don't talk, then we aren't all going to get lined up. But
all right, so what did you think of his answer, and what were you getting at there with the 3-3-5 and the communication?
Traditionally, the Mike linebacker, the middle linebacker, is the guy that's getting everything communicated, right, throughout the line of scrimmage with the guys up front, getting people where they need to be. That's just the traditional structure of things. I think with the 3-3-5, because the variables are moved now to the third level or to the DBs, it doesn't require as much maybe. And maybe that was, kind of a suggestion on my part that maybe the required communication from the linebacking spot isn't as much as it usually is, because the DBs now have so much communication on the back end of where they're going to go and how they're supporting each other and rotating in coverage and things like that, where the linebackers are kind of independent of that movement. Whereas in every other defense, they're more connected. If the safeties are coming down to one side, that means the linebackers coming in from that side as well. But that's not necessarily the case in the 3-3-5, right? The DBs, there's more of them, number one, on the back end, and then their movement is almost independent of what's going on in the interior. So there may be some overlap in the communication. But obviously Woodard, with the experience that he's had in the past with the system, he understands what he needs to communicate, how communication is still valuable for him, and not just for him, but for everybody on the defense. That the communication has to be nonstop. So his job as a vocal leader is still there as I would call him the middle linebacker right now. He's one of the two inside linebackers. But if I had to, categorize who the leader of the linebacker group is right now, Jackson Woodard would be that guy. Just because, like you said, the experience, he's a football guy. His football IQ is pretty obvious when he's out there on the field moving between the lines. So, but he still has a vocal role in the communication on the defensive side, even though the DBs may be talking a little bit more than they usually would in traditional 4-3 shell. He still has to have a role in that communication as a linebacker. And I just, I've never listened to the communication on a defense like this. So it's very different to hear how many different calls are coming from the field. And like the DBs are saying one thing and the linebackers are saying another thing, and getting the line set is a whole nother can of worms, and where they're going to be slanting. There's a lot more communication than your average football team. So everybody still has a role in communicating, even the linebackers in this case.
Michael Scheer came in the room a little later on, the defensive coordinator, and he graded where communication is right now.
We need to be better, but it's getting there. To start this camp out, we've thrown a lot at them because I think they can do a lot with what we have personnel-wise. And in order to do a lot, you have to communicate a lot. The really good defenses, you don't even have to look. You can just close your eyes and listen. Okay? And that's what we need to get to, and we're working on it. We're not anywhere close yet, but we're getting there.
Now, when a DC, in this case, in this defense, with a 3-3-5, when we're talking communication, is it during the play or is it before the play? Like the example is, if Jeray Williams is the nickel and you've got two safeties, different guys can approach the line, right? Is that the communication? Like, hey, who's going to approach the line? Or you should know that's the play call. So what's the communication? Once the play starts, is it then, or is it also diagnosing what's in front of you?
There's layers to it, right? There is the sideline call. Defenses usually don't huddle now, especially these days. But there's a sideline call, which is kind of the broad scheme and what you're going to be lining up to. Then there's the initial offense breaks to huddle, and they line up. So based on the original sideline call, you might have kind of a base formation, but they come out in, let's say, a 3-by-1 set. Now that base formation has an adjustment. That has to be communicated. Not only do we communicate what the original call is, but now that they're in this trips formation, we have to now adjust. So we got to communicate that, get lined up to trips, because your defense is going to look different against trips than it was against a 2-by-2 formation. So that's one thing to communicate. Does that mean we canceled off a blitz? Is there a blitz that we have to abort because the formation? Then within that formation, if they go trips and then they motion to now back to 2-by-2, now that has to be communicated. Now the defense has to rock and shift all the way back to what it was originally, right? And maybe the blitz is back on in that case, or maybe we keep it off, leave it as it is, and things like that. If there's a formation now at that point that you get to, that's something you didn't see in practice. Every offense has a wrinkle or something that they bring out. What's the call that you get to that's just a blanket call that can cover any coverage, that can cover any formation? A lot of teams have some signal that they throw out. One of the defenses that I played against, I remember, was Vandal. Anytime you hear them go Vandal, their base coverage was Tampa 2, and they would drop into Tampa 2. And that was kind of the catch-all for coverage maybe that they didn't cover. So if there's confusion and getting lined up, somebody's just screaming Vandal. That's a communication that has to be right away for the defense, right? So that's 3 different layers before the snap even happens. Now, once the snap happens, there's communication that goes on where there's run pass calls or things like that. It does get a little bit more muddled. Obviously, it's physical. At that point, you should be already lined up and know your assignment. You shouldn't have to say much to anybody else, but the run pass calls are definitely valuable, and that's when the sideline gets involved. So there's constant noise going on if you're on a good defense, and there's communication from top to bottom, whether it's from the sideline during the pre-snap rituals, during formation shifts and motions and things like that, and then even after the snap. You're nonstop communicating if you're a defender. And that's a part of conditioning too. I don't people don't realize that constantly talking and being the vocal person, it takes a lot out of you when you're also running full speed the play before. You don't get a break. And this is something that I realized and I appreciate about running quarterbacks, guys like Lamar Jackson. Not only do you run for 40 yards and outrun everybody, but you don't get a break. You got to come back out and yell the next plays. Same thing for middle linebackers or DBs in this case, in a defense that's communicating well. That communication has to last. And you can't be out of shape and trying to communicate, if that makes sense. You're going to be gassed. You're going to be sucking for air instead of getting the next call in or getting the communications out. But the best defenses do. I remember this was a playing experience when I took my first starts in my sophomore year, or my first playing time against West Virginia when I played, and their defense. Not only were they massive, I mean, I was still a little boy at this point in my life. I hadn't developed any sort of muscles yet, but they communicated so loud, I couldn't communicate with the offense. So whatever checks that I was trying to do, they were just talking so much that I couldn't get my communications across to my team. So that's how much communication impacts the defense.
So by my best estimate, and I don't want to confuse people when we talk linebackers, because we're not really talking outside linebackers. We're talking about traditional linebackers. Like you said, it looks like Woodard is in line to start. With him has been Marcel McDuffie. I think behind them are Blessing, the freshman out of Hawaii, and also Jordan Eubanks, who was a second-year player at UNLV from Florida State. I think that's the group of 4 kind of traditional linebacker spots. So we're going to try to mention names. We've only seen 2 practices, so we're not going to sit here and give an official depth chart because I don't think anything is set. But it is intriguing. We know Woodard has experience with the 3-3-5. McDuffie's really on the come here, and he's an Arroyo recruit. Blessing is too, and Eubanks, as I mentioned, is a transfer. So what are you seeing out of that group of 4 dudes? Good size, and I think pretty good speed.
I think they've stacked up size-wise a lot. I think Eubanks is one I think that really caught my eye as far as the difference in his size now that he's getting more reps and out there on the field much. But I think one of the key factors is movement. And this is not just straight line speed. It's not just the ability to run a fast 40 or whatever the case may be, but the ability to have functional movement. And it's something that Coach Odom's mentioned several times to the press and to us about what he wanted to focus on during the strength and conditioning phase and the offseason workouts was not just bulking up for the sake of having weight, but also making sure that your movement is efficient. So that's one of the things that I was watching for with linebackers, particularly because I know in this 3-3-5 defense, they're going to be required to have a lot of movement. Pre-snap, moving, but reaction time, they have to be quick to the ball, just the way that the scheme is set up for them to have gap control from depth. So I've been watching the explosiveness from all of the guys, but Eubanks is a guy that really stood out to me. And maybe it's just the eyeball test. He definitely passes that. He and Jackson Woodard probably fit the bill for as far as the physical look of a football guy. But they all seem to be displaying at different points that quickness and explosion to the hole and to the gap, along with the football IQ. And I think this is where Woodard maybe stands out a lot to me is maybe it's his comfortability with this defensive scheme and understanding his role in it. And that may be the case. But it also just may be that he's just a football guy. Like he has an IQ and a nose for where to be and how to fit and how to pursue the football. And that's going to come in handy. I think the linebackers, depth-wise, I think is probably the most improved core or the most improved unit so far, at least through 2 practices. I mean, obviously the DBs added so many numbers, but I think the quality depth that they added at linebacker is going to be valuable because we know that's been a position of struggle as far as the depth on the roster for the linebacker position. But it looks like with the 4 or 5 guys that you mentioned, I'd throw Fred Tompkins in the mix as well. He's a guy that we're familiar with that's returning, but he's a guy that may be fighting for a job or fighting for time on the field. And that's saying something, especially with the way he finished last year. The room has gotten so much better that he's now fighting for depth or a spot in the depth on there and not, a shoe-in starter at the position.
Austin Ajike out of eligibility. Kyle Beaudry could have come back, but elected to go into the real world and actually start his career. And from what I hear, he's got a job in New York. We'll double check on that one. But after the spring, he elected to move on. We've talked a lot about Jackson Woodard. He was available today. We went in this direction, just talking about his role as a leader. I think it's pretty unique that you've got a transfer in, and he's trying to blend with guys who have been here. He talked about trying to do that and be a leader.
Barry Odom talked about you and leadership yesterday. So what's it like transferring to a new program, you got some vets in front of you, you got vets behind you. What's it like trying to be a leader when you're one of the new faces?
It's been good. It's been smooth, but I give a lot of the credit to the guys in the locker room. They came in, they accepted me, they pushed me, and allowed me to be a leader, which I think is very important. Being a leader, it's what I've tried to do. But also, Doug, there's so many other leaders on this team that it's easy to lead when you see them leading. But yeah, just coming into this program, I was they opened their arms and let me in, so it made it easy.
Welcomed him with open arms. I think that's kind of the sentiment he's getting at. I think it's a very mature stance. I think for a player to take in his situation, and the way he went about answering that question, and I'm sure the way he's handled himself in the locker room, it's a little bit of humility there, understanding that he is still the new guy, but he's kind of thrust into a leadership role because of what he can do on the field, and his familiarity. Let's be honest with Coach Odom and his staff and Coach Shear. He obviously, probably knows a little bit more about this offense or this defense rather coming into things. So that's the role he understands he has to take. But leadership is just as much about the people that follow you and their willingness to follow you. And I think that's kind of the point he was getting at there when talking about the guys being willing to let him be the leader. That's big of the guys in the locker room. It speaks to what he does by example. I think that's one of the things that all leaders should have is the ability to lead by example. There are several times during the past 2 practices where it seems like the guy's energy is a little low. People are slow trotting to the sideline, and there's Jackson up in the front, kind of leading the way, first guy to the sideline, cheering the rest of the guys in. Seems like a little thing, but in the heat of camp, and when you start to get tired and those dog days start to come, seeing your leaders do that, it just cements them as leaders. And I think Doug realized that and learned that. I'd say last year, and definitely exemplifies that this year. And on the defensive side, Jonathan Baldwin has been a guy that's familiar to the program that does the same thing. But I think Jackson and his capabilities and his know-how, his football IQ on the field, kind of require him to be a leader on and off of it. So it's big that the guys accepted him and they embraced him as the new guy, but also as the new leader on the defensive side of the ball.
Here's Woodard talking about just arriving in Las Vegas, the decision to go from an SEC program in his home state of Arkansas and following Odom and picking Las Vegas.
My time at Arkansas was good. I was, wanting to get on the field more, and the transfer portal became available and it became a thing. I decided to enter the transfer portal, and once I entered the portal, Coach Odom reached out, and everyone who's played for him wants to play for him. So as soon as he reached out, there's no questions about where I was going. I was coming to UNLV to play for him, and that just speaks to who he is as a man and also as a coach.
What do you think of Vegas versus Little Rock and Fayetteville?
It's a lot different, but I tell everybody football's football. So wherever you go, it's the same. It's the same work. You got to work just as hard. But it's also, there's more opportunities. There's more things to do, more things to see. So it's been fun. It's the best city, I think, in the world. Sports is growing. It's been awesome. Everyone's been welcoming here as well.
He also said, when asked about what he misses about Arkansas, that he used to like to sit on the porch. His family has a farm, and he liked to look at the pasture.
Well, I mean, he's just going to miss that. We don't have pastures here,
All
so
right.
I don't know many people with a real front porch either. So I mean, in Vegas, if you're missing anything, that's probably going to be a tough thing to remedy while you're in Vegas. But no, his comments, I think, speak to the fact. I think everybody's kind of realizing now you can sell Las Vegas as a sports town. Even now, you can sell it as more than just an entertainment city that doesn't have anything to offer. You can sell it as a sports town, and you can sell it to a lot of guys who are familiar with sports. And I think Jackson's no exception to that. He knows football. He's probably grown up around football, been around football his whole life. So selling the sports town side of Las Vegas is one thing. It also speaks to the relationships that I think Coach Odom and his staff have prioritized, and who Coach Odom is as a person. And it might sound cliche. It is what it is, but there's an element of that goes into recruiting. To pull a guy who grew up in the South from the SEC to pull him away from that conference, it's bigger than just the opportunity to play in my estimation, because you could go from Arkansas to pretty much anywhere, and get a look at least to play. And it's not like I'm not saying this about Jackson just because he's a Rebel now, but he's a football guy. He looks like a football player. Maybe he wasn't getting a chance at Arkansas, but he could have gotten a chance at any other Group of 5 school or any other, I dare to say, power conference, just because of what he is as a football player, as a younger football player. So the fact that Coach Odom was able to pull him to Las Vegas, I think that speaks to his relationship building skills and his ability to resonate with players. And that players want to play for him wherever he is. He's gotten multiple transfers from Arkansas to come to UNLV, and we've seen them during this fall camp. Obviously, he's got a staff that's followed him and been a part of his journey as a coach, whether he's coached them or been with him at different stops as a coach himself. His relationship building skills, I think, are one of the reasons guys like Jackson are now a part of UNLV. And that's big for me. I think that speaks volumes to what he's going to be able to do as a recruiter in the future. But in the case of Jackson, I think it's great to hear a guy, he sounds like a very humble person. Let's say that. And it's a common theme, I think, with Southern gentlemen. I think, I don't know if you could hear during the presser when he was available for media, yes, sir, that he was saying yes, sir, to just about everybody as they're talking, respectfully. And just that kind of mentality that he brings, understanding he's a football guy and he's going to do his best to put his best foot forward. I like it. I like that he's here. I like that he made the decision and that Vegas didn't scare him away because he's a Southern boy. It was like he can find a home for himself here. Although he'll miss those green pastures, he'll probably, find some way to get out into the nature somewhere around here.
They go to Fresno. There'll be a trip to Wyoming in the future. There's pastures, but Fresno's a farming area. So on Jackson Woodard, you get a decent feel for him there. And again, we're putting out a lot more videos up at UNLV All Access on Twitter. It's UNLV All Access up on Twitter. So check for more videos there. And we may even just kind of cobble together these mini press conferences and put out the whole thing during the week. Michael Shear's the boss. He's an Arkansas guy. He's a Missouri guy, but Arkansas linebacker coach, now the DC. First, before we play this long bite where he talks about the defensive line, what do you think of Shear? I know you gravitate towards the offensive people. You love talking offense. I got a kick out of sitting there on Saturday and listening to Shear. He's very casual in his delivery. He's very honest. He has a good assessment. You can tell, though, he's another one of those dudes who's a football guy, and he would just sit there and shoot the bull with you about defense for a long time.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. He's a football guy through and through, and I think that matches with Coach Odom's personality, number one. You can see how that relationship would work well. A straight shooter, which is, the truth hurts sometimes, but most of the time the truth is just what it is. And I think that's kind of an understanding that he has. But he also, just watching him during these couple of practices and even through the spring, he's a likable coach. And that doesn't necessarily mean the term player coach gets thrown out there. He's a player's coach, quote unquote. Like that gets thrown out there a lot, and almost to a detriment. Like people take that as you're too friendly with the players for whatever reason. So I wouldn't categorize him as that. He's a likable coach where the players, whether he's being nice to them or not, like what he's saying. They like what he's doing. They like who he is. And it's almost charismatic the way he approaches things, the way he speaks to us even. And then the way he speaks to the players. And there are several times where, like you said, I gravitate to offense, but sometimes the defensive drills are just right where we are with the limitations of the space on the sideline because the one field thing right now, UNLV's second field is still being worked on, so they're not allowed to work on it yet. So everything's kind of crammed together. But I'm forced sometimes, and then sometimes now I'm interested to watch these interactions that he's having with the player. And the way he's correcting, the way he's coaching, it's not always yelling and screaming and blowing a gasket. It's sometimes just a subtle with a smile, you messed up, right? Like, I guess that's not how we do things. And then the player then responds with, yeah, I know, you're right, a smile, and then fixes it right away. And there's no love lost in that. And that's a skill. I'm not sure how long it's taken to develop it, how natural it is, but he's got it. And it's a very personable approach to coaching. And I think it comes through when he answers some of the questions with the press as well.
So listen to this breakdown, because I've been really curious in this 3-3-5 with the personnel that was being carried over in that first three. So this is a long answer. Shear starts just going through everyone, and he sounds really enthusiastic. But I'll tell you, the thing that got me was at the very beginning, he mentions two newcomers, one from Louisiana Monroe and one from Austin Peay. And when I saw these guys pop up about 6 weeks ago, I was like, oh, okay. I guess Ricky may have been a little bit off in terms of needing some more bodies. Now there's a lot more competition and guys who are plug and play dudes.
You got a couple of transfers in. I know Cooper Webb up front. He's a big, strong kid. You got Alex Whitmore, who has been playing lights out up front also. And when you add guys like that, it just raises the whole room. So they've helped a lot. Fisher K-Mac continues to just be a standout, whether it's spring or here. And also, we've got Xavier Carter, who was out all spring, who's back in. And a guy like Elijah Shelton. I know they're linebackers, but there's times where they're going to be down playing like a DN. Having all of those guys now healthy, stronger, faster, and then you add back in Naki, who was out all spring. You have a lot more pieces, and you feel a lot better about the depth and the talent level of what we got up front. They work hard. I didn't bring up the obvious like Darius Johnson and Jalen Dixon. You got those guys too, but we've always known we had those, right? And then we have more pieces, it just gets deeper and deeper.
So at the start of the comment, Shearer mentions a couple of big fellas, 285, 290, who are in. Whitmore in from Austin P, and then Cooper Webb, who's in from Northeastern Oklahoma A&M and UL Monroe. So, he made it clear, hey, the guys that have been there, the top-notch guys, they got them, right? And Dixon and Darius Johnson. And by the way, Darius Johnson is just bigger, stronger. He's a bowling ball at 300 pounds and 6'3". Mentions the return of Naki as well. I don't know if people saw it. I pointed out yesterday that Waisali Muvesi is up from 300 to 325, and the 44 makes him look like he's 500 pounds. I'm not saying he's fat. It just makes him look bigger, but it's interesting. And he also threw in, the guys who are going to walk up, who are going to wind up playing kind of a fourth defensive lineman in certain sets. So they sound like they're pretty happy here. And, man, they've created some competition because that means biggins like Ben Key and Nick Demetris, like, guys, you got to go because you had the spring to show them what you could do, and they went out and they got some guys that you could argue Monroe and Austin P are lower levels, but these guys can play, and Shearer's paying them some pretty good compliments here.
Yeah, that's for sure. I think they've added so much depth at that front line position, and we talked about during the offseason the recruiting class and the freshmen and how to mix in JUCO transfers that are going to be expected to play right away. I think they did a good job of adding guys on the D-line that can play right away, whether or not they pick up the plays or get their alignment and assignment down in time for the season. It seems like they're going to get every opportunity to do that. The reps are there for everybody right now at this point. I think we've seen just about everybody on the D-line, with the exception of some guys that are working their way back from injury. Those reps are kind of limited. We see them out there, but they're just trying to ease them back into camp. But there are guys that we figure will be contributing at some point in the season, if not right away. Like guys like Naki, who's been out with injury for quite some time now, trying to work his way back into the rotation. But these guys are now going to be almost rotational pieces by default because there's just so many of them that are quality depth players. I think so much of the question mark was for both sides up front, how could you find a starting group? But I think what they did was not only find guys that they can trust as a starting lineup or a starting rotation, but they've added some depth behind them. So even if the guys don't necessarily make it to that front line, with the way that this 3-3-5 defense is set up, there may be times where you rotate quickly with the different guys just to get guys a blow, get guys a series off here or there. Maybe even have guys that are package guys for maybe pass rush situations versus stopping the run. And obviously with Muvesi being 325 now with a stretched out number 44 jersey, I think he's going to be one of those guys that's clogging up the middle. It's safe to say that's a short yardage situation. He's going to be out there on the field. But it's one of those things where they solve the issue of not being maybe considered big enough with recruiting class, not being able to find guys that have the size, or enough guys that have the size for a 4-3 defense. You solve that problem by then going to just a three-man front where you essentially say, I only need 3 big guys instead of 4. And then use your linebackers and speed on the edges to kind of fill in the gaps on your defense. So maybe that's kind of a loophole that the 3-3-5 unintentionally brings it about, is that you don't have to recruit size as much, but it is important to have the right kind of size in the right spot. And I think from what we see, the guys that are bigger, like you mentioned Darius Johnson, how massive he is, he can still move. I mean, he's a guy that's huge, yes, but he's agile as well. And some of the drills they're doing during camp, It's funny watching him try to get skinny and squeeze between bags. That's one of the drills they're out there this afternoon, was just smacking one of the bags down, getting skinny, and trying to split the two defenders, a simulation. Those kind of movements, Darius Johnson's good at. He can make those moves happen. He can do spin moves. He can swim. He has a package of moves that he can do for a pass rush standpoint. So he's not just a big blob sitting in the middle, right? Same thing with guys like Jalen Dixon, who are maybe a little undersized, even if you think about it, but still the twitch and the speed and the movement capability of the three guys up front make it even harder to contain them and harder to deal with them as a collection of D linemen up front. So I'm excited to see how it all comes together. I'm excited to see how the depth ends up shaking out once everybody's back and healthy and by the end of camp. Obviously, once the pads come on, the evaluation for D linemen is going to change quite a bit. So maybe some guys that are up front now slip back a little bit if the physicality isn't there once the pads come on. But I really, honestly, don't see that being a problem for anybody on the front seven or anybody on the defense right now. Physicality is not going to be the problem.
I hit Austin P, Louisiana Monroe. We can talk about all the JUCOs and some of the other transfers in this transfer cycle. The most high-profile guy they got was a Pac-12 player with 30-plus starts in Jackson Turner. We pointed out on Friday that he wasn't really out there. He was engaged on the sideline paying attention, but not out there. Saturday, that changed. You can give an update. He was out there during 7-on-7s. Yeah,
so he definitely started off practice still kind of easing his way into things. And Coach Odom mentioned him during the presser yesterday that there's some nagging things there, like there are with a couple of people out there, that you want to make sure that they're right before they get out there and maybe do even more harm to a minor injury. But like you said, he has a resume coming in. So as a transfer coming in, obviously fans have probably looked up this resume and known that the guy has playing experience at a high level, not just being on a team, but actually playing and producing, putting stats on the board for a Power 5 conference school. An older guy, so he's kind of not just transferring in with a lot of time left. He's not somebody who's trying to figure things out. He's got experience, but he's got a limited window. So you don't bring a guy like that in without the expectation that they're going to commit or they're going to contribute right away. Right. So earlier today in practice, he was out there during some of the 7-on-7 stuff. He got in the rotation, and I think maybe just to get his feet wet, just to get a feel for how his body responds to being out there with live bullets flying all around him. He came during the spring, but did not participate in many of the team activities at that point either. So now he's worked his way back to the point where they feel confident enough, at least in a 7-on-7 capacity before the pads are on, to put him out there to kind of test where his wheels are. And I think that it's a good sign. I think the DB core is solidified right now in terms of kind of their role in the defense. And I think adding depth there, whether or not he makes it into the starting rotation or he's just a member of the two deep where he's rotating frequently in the secondary, he's going to be a contributing member of the secondary is what I'm getting at. And his build, his makeup, his physicality, I think you can see it before you even see him put the pads on. He's just built a little bit more mature than a lot of guys in the secondary at this point. So his playing time will, I think, increase as camp goes on. I definitely, just on paper, expect him to be a contributing member of the secondary. And that's not just because he's originally from Moreno Valley, California, which is, shout out, my hometown. But it's because I think he can ball. I think he's got it in him to be a real force on defense, especially where they rotated him in during the 7-on-7 unit, where he's kind of a rover at points in the defense and just using his instincts to be in the right spot and get underneath routes and almost be a robber kind of safety in the secondary, while also having the strength and athleticism to come down and play run fits. I think that versatility is kind of the theme across the secondary, and I think he fits the bill perfectly.
Yeah, and other guys in that position to challenge for safety on the two line. Believe it or not, freshman Cam Jenkins was in the spring. He looked good. He's a big part of the mix, and I know you pointed out that Jet Elad had some moments. He's wearing number 9, another transfer in who at one point was at Ohio. So let's close on this. Last couple minutes. Let's talk about the 2 days of Doug Brumfield. Heavy workload on Friday, lesser workload today. Just explain that, what you saw on day 1 versus day 2.
Well, I think day 1 I think he came out with the energy that you want your starting guy to come out with on day 1. And not just the energy, but the execution. I tweeted out that, and it's something that I take note of because obviously I'm a quarterback, so I look at what the quarterbacks are doing from an execution standpoint. Routes on air, it should be the expectation, but routes on air day 1 of fall camp can sometimes be ugly. And I think he was perfect routes on air on day 1. And the route tree wasn't complicated. It wasn't, anything to be too excited about, but just that being the standard for him was big for me to watch and to watch how important it was to him for there not to be a ball touching the turf. Obviously, the coaching staff is always going to be that rah and make sure that happens. But he executed at a high level, and then not just the volume of snaps on day one, because that was new. We haven't seen him in practice during fall camps, at least in the last 2 years, take that many reps, because he's been splitting reps. So this practice, it was exciting to see the volume of reps he took. That's one aspect of it. But then the efficiency with his reps, they were all clean. I mean, it might not have been a completion every time. It might not have been, a home run hit for the offense every time. But for the most part, it was very clean from an execution standpoint. It looked like he knew where he was going. He knew where guys were supposed to be and lined up correctly. The tempo of the snap, of the cadence, it wasn't like there were a lot of drag between snaps, which is a problem sometimes in fall camp, where you're wasting a lot of time on the mechanics of getting lined up and things like that, and the snaps aren't coming as frequently. There's a good tempo to practice, and Doug obviously has a lot to do with that, with what he's able to do as a signal caller. But as a passer, he was on point both days. I think he's put some things on display, I think, as improvements. One being his pocket presence. There's a couple of times during pass under pressure, that's what we used to call it. I don't know if it's still called that, pup, where he stepped up into the pocket and didn't bail out on the pocket maybe as quickly as he would have in his youth. He stepped up, found a throw downfield, and was able to deliver from the pocket, I think, more efficiently than he was in the past. And I think that's a part of his maturation. Maybe some of the things he learned at the Manning Passing Academy are translating already, and he's becoming more of a thoughtful player and thinking the game through and preparing for practice the way he would a game. So he's looked sharp in these first two practices. And we'll see if that continues. I hope it does. I think it's not like the defense is making it easy for him, and that's why he's looked good these last two practices. We said it at the spring. The defense was ahead of the offense by a lot in the spring, and I still think they are from a I guess measuring stick standpoint. The defense is a little bit ahead of the offense as far as what they're able to do and the speed they're able to fly around with. But Doug has still looked good. He's fit the ball in some tight windows, on which we know he's capable of, that strong arm. And he looks like a starting quarterback. He's looked like the guy, and we've always said that about him. But it looks like he stepped into that role confidently this year and is ready to take the next step in his maturation. And that should be exciting, especially with this new look offense and the ability for big plays that it presents. I think Doug's efficiency is gonna shine through here.
It looked comfortable to me. I heard him verbalizing a lot of things to receivers, the offensive line, and the running backs. Some things that if there was an error, what they need to do differently, and maybe the look they were getting defensively. I didn't see that in the spring. So the growth from there to today has, I think, been exceptional. That means he's put in a lot of time.
Yeah, and that's part of being a quarterback, right? It doesn't always. Everything's not going to be clean. Everything's not going to be perfect. You're going to have to fix some stuff. Not only are you going to have to be able to know and be vocal enough about knowing what you know, but you're going to have that vocal recognition where guys hear you say something and they know it was him that messed up, right? The quarterback can't be correcting you to do the wrong thing. So his knowledge of the plays and knowledge of the system, knowledge of situations is paramount. And every quarterback understands that. And I think Doug not only understands it, but he's embraced the role that he plays. And he was admittedly not a vocal leader by nature. I think it was not his demeanor to be a rah-rah, loud, and talkative person out on the field. But sometimes you have to be uncomfortable, and you have to make those adjustments for the better of the team. And I think he's done that. And I agree with Coach Odom. He's made several little tweaks to guys' alignments, whether it's tightening a split down, adjusting a guy to the strong side or the weak side based on whatever the personnel is. He's been very much more vocal. And I can't help but think that a lot of that has to do with the fact that he's been the guy from day one. I think when Odom, came through the door, Doug was one of the first guys he mentioned. It's a small thing, and maybe was kind of subtle and maybe a no-brainer to fans who knew Doug and how good he was. But I think Odom giving Doug that confidence publicly meant a lot. And I think Doug took that seriously from the time that opening press conference back in February or January, whenever Odom touched down. I think he took that to heart and really stepped into that role from that day, so that now come fall, he's had time to absorb the playbook, take his role seriously, take the offense by the horns, and really lead the team through fall camp.
Here's Jackson Woodard, the linebacker, talking about Brumfield and the rest of the quarterbacks and what he's seen so far in terms of spring to fall.
Doug stepped up a lot this summer. He took a leadership role, but Doug looks really good. He's making throws, but all the quarterbacks look good. Every single quarterback this summer, he got a lot better, faster, stronger, more confident. And I think that's what I've seen with Doug and honestly all the quarterbacks, their confidence. has been boosted, and they're playing really well.
I think there's a lot of people who could see what Doug does, and kind of measure his improvement, but nobody better than the defense, right? They're the ones who go against him. Your competition in a lot of ways knows you best, and I think sometimes not in this case it's not an enemy because obviously your teammates at the end of the day, but you're going against each other in a competitive setting day in and day out. So he's studying, whether or not he realizes it. Jackson is studying Doug as the competition throughout fall camp. So he's going to be able to measure the improvement at a more honest rate, I think. And obviously, there's politics involved. You're not going to, bash your starting quarterback to the press on day 2 of the camp. But I think there's truth in what he's saying. I think Jackson's a straight enough shooter to be honest about that and to really see, like we see, the measured improvement in Doug's game and where he is as the starting quarterback and the confidence and the leadership that he's assumed now being that guy, that number one guy. We definitely haven't seen it before. We haven't seen this confident of a Doug before. And he was confident, but not like this in this capacity. I think Jackson and the rest of the defense can probably attest to it better than we could, that Doug's a problem to go up against day in and day out in practice. And I'm sure they're learning that firsthand here in fall.
All right, time's up. Buzzer is sounding. We have a lot more to get to. We had a lot more on deck. But I will throw this out before we close. One, you can find so much of the stuff on UNLV All Access up on Twitter. We have a YouTube page. It's my YouTube page. We load a lot of stuff up there. And then really the place you want to go for all the audio is the Learfield Varsity podcast page. When you look that up, All Access is up there. There's a UNLV banner. There's, the other 80 schools are up there as well, but that's a great spot because sometimes we will post the audio there and it doesn't go out on social media for a couple of days. And it's actually the original spot where this podcast goes up. Last, we'll say 90 seconds, right? Because we're trying to keep this to 45 or 50 minutes max every week. I think the O-line is one of the biggest things to follow. I think I'm going to drive Barry Odom crazy asking about it. Jalen St. John is playing left tackle the first couple of days of practice. Marcus Miller played there in the spring. Jalen was inside. Barry Odom said, hey, Jalen St. John can play all 5 positions across the line. You're talking about a 4-star guy who went to Arkansas, got in some trouble. They land in the Rebels' lap, and he's a massive guy, has sculpted his body, but 6'4", 325. The first 2 days of camp, the left tackle, check that, the left guard right next to him is Matthias Sua, who we'd never really heard of. I saw him pop up on the roster as a Gorman bounce back from Western Colorado. He's been out there with the ones at left guard, so the battle is on. Like for the guards who've been working to try to Rosas and Makahele, who've been working to get up there. I mean, this says a lot that they've got a guy in from Western Colorado, a hometown guy, a Gorman guy, and he's right in there. I don't know what's going to happen. Odom claims, I'm not suggesting he's lying, but Marcus Miller can play all across the line. So it's on, man. The shuffling is on, and that's really interesting at left tackle. That left guard to me sends a lot of messages to the guys on the line in the 2s and the 3s.
Yeah, and you're going to get your shot, and if you haven't already gotten your shot, to prove that you can or not, right? Sua is a guy, like you mentioned, we don't really know a lot about. He's kind of new. He's fairly new, but he's out there with what we think is the first group reps, right? It could change. I think the pads, just like the D-line, the pads change a lot, right? You get the pads clapping, and maybe a guy that you thought had it doesn't really have it. But the fact that he's out there getting his reps, and the fact that so many guys now, because the way practice is set up, there's so many reps for everybody. It's the most reps of especially team-oriented stuff that we've seen the Rebels do, like on a consistent basis. This is only 2 practices in of the fall program, but they're not wasting any time. So there's reps to be had, but you're going to have to prove it. He's not going to wait around and hand anybody anything. If a new guy comes in and he's ready to go day 1, he's going to get the day 1 reps. And if he stays ready to go all throughout camp, I'm sure he's going to start. There's no love lost between anybody, but you got to go earn it, and you're going to get the chance to do it. It's just a matter if you take advantage of your reps.
And Jay Nabeau is in the mix at one of the guard spots. I think he's playing mostly right guard on the 2. So for Big Mike, his dad, I mentioned him. Not that you're pressuring me, but he is in the mix. But that left guard thing, man, that got real interesting when Jalen St. John kicked out the tackle. Now you got a battle there. And remember, the guard position that was going to be their strongest guy returning, they lost Leaf to Arizona State. They wound up losing Preston Nichols late to Purdue. He went to the Big Ten. Great job, Caleb. I got to say, everyone out there, kudos to Caleb, because there are a lot of former athletes who played the game who get a job as an analyst. That's what they do. They're there on game day. Caleb's out there for the practices. We're taping this on a Saturday. It's a long day. This is my job. Caleb's here doing the podcast after being out around practice for like 4 hours. So, dude, I appreciate it. I hope the listeners do, because all I do is kind of traffic cop this thing and deliver some of the sound. But Caleb's the guy who's breaking it down. So great job today, and great job these first couple days.